There we go. Hey guys, good evening. This is Tim O'Connor, New York State Senate District 51. I am a candidate for the New York State Senate, guys. I'm running in District 51, which is roughly the size of Connecticut, believe it or not. It's absolutely huge. Square footage, square mileage wise, square acre wise, just one of the largest in the state. Now we have across that area a wide range, of living and lifestyles, right? There's some small cities, there's some small towns, there's some really rural American areas. And with me tonight, guys, is Vince Pryor. He's Western Ulster County, which, believe it or not, is in Senate District 51. He goes almost all the way down. If you take a look at I don't know where I put my map. Anyways, it goes all the way down south near the city. And so what Vince is Vince is a Libertarian. He serves on the Hardenburg Town Board and is the deputy supervisor of the town of Hardinsburg. So I think one of the things I want to ask Vince about is what it takes to be a Libertarian and serve on the town board, because as you guys know, I'm encouraging a lot of you to give this idea a thought. So Vince, whenever you're ready, please introduce yourself. Let us know what you do, things like that.
So, well, my name is Vince Pryor. I think you gave me a fairly decent introduction there, so I won't go on too much about myself superficially there. To answer your question about actually, sitting on a town board as a Libertarian, I think that situation is going to look very different depending on the town that you live in. And I happen to live in a town that is, I'm not going to say libertarian leaning, but I'm going to say that we're a small town, and there's an inherent sense of community. And so people generally get along, and generally, from a political standpoint, we're dealing with issues that most of us can agree on. Sometimes it takes, some stretching of your libertarian ideals to actually, kind of make the sausage, so to speak. And, and sometimes you have to step back and say, well, there's this money, and this money is going to get spent whether I want it to get spent or not. So our best thing is to invest it wisely in the community, So sometimes you have to kind of take taxation is theft. And while I may philosophically agree with that, at the same point in time, taxation is happening. And I think that as a Libertarian, I have to make sure that money that's going to get spent anyway is spent in a way that makes the most sense.
All right. So while we're right there, how many roads have you guys sold to private industry down there in Hardinsburg?
Well, that's that is an interesting subject, and the road subject is an often cited kind of trope of the Libertarian Party, and on some levels we have to realize that government works. A small town road department, it works. I pay in a fair share towards receiving that service. Once you get outside of that local level, I think that then you see funds used in a way that doesn't benefit the individual necessarily. So
yeah, I think as Libertarians, I think one of the things we like is we like our government local, because at least then we have a semblance of an agreement, right? Where your neighbor wants a road in front of his house, you want a road in front of your house, and we understand that we're kind of collectively buying something from members of our community, right? There's guys that actually make a living when they're out there managing the roads. Where I think a lot of Libertarians, and I just want to point out that I think there are so many people that lean Libertarian, that they understand these philosophies, that they recognize when the big state government takes money from small communities, be it from sales tax or forcing mandates on counties and communities, that money doesn't get well spent. That we're looking at programs ostensibly to help our neighbors, right? But how does that work if the money goes all the way up to the top and then filters through a whole bureaucracy and comes back down? So we talk about buying roads and selling roads. I'm not uncomfortable with our local community getting reimbursed from our taxes to pay guys to take care of our roads, right?
Well, I think that's a valid point, that the money is best kept local. Our tax money should be used and invested locally to make our community a better place. And I think you see a redistribution of wealth in a lot of cases where you have communities paying out in taxes that are being used elsewhere. And all of New York State is paying for things like the mass transit authority in the city. So I, as somebody who may have used their system twice in my entire life, is subsidizing the 8 million people in the Metro New York area that are using the service on a daily basis. So if those 8 million people in New York want to pitch their tax money together and have a metro system, I'm all about that. But I don't feel it's right for those who aren't directly, or I think maybe there's some kind of indirect benefit that we get, but to value that, to put a value on that and weigh it against the amount of tax money that we've paid into the system, I think you don't end up with a positive ratio there.
Yeah, on the order of the metro, and these are some of my numbers I get because they stick in my head. But Larry Sharp, a Libertarian candidate for governor of New York State, said that on order of $6 billion a year from the New York State budget goes to keeping the subway system in New York City up to speed, up to snuff, running on somewhat on time. So then you read another study by a CNY, CCNY, whatever, the City College of New York, okay? An economics professor says, well, the economic impact to the rest of the state of New York City and its environs is at least plus $6 billion. And you're kind of like, well, I don't know if those numbers wash out.
Well, I think maybe the numbers wash out, but you're not looking at that money as an end total, its total effect on the state. I think most of that monetary gain probably stays in a select community in the city. And you may get some trickling out with tourism out of the city, but beyond that, it used to be that our local farms provided the butter for New York City and the milk and the vegetables. But I think you would be hard pressed to walk into a grocery store in New York City now and be able to afford to buy New York State grown produce. It's cheaper for us to buy the apples from Chile and the
avocados from Mexico,
the spinach, right? The spinach from California, and the avocados from Mexico, and the bananas from Central America in various countries.
So that brings me to a subject, and I don't want to pop way off of what we're talking about because I think that subject's important. But one of the things I've been advocating for, and I don't know if you've got people around there that do this, but we have local guys that grow beef up here. And so I've literally filled my freezer with beef from my neighbor. Okay. The guy lives 5 miles away. Do you guys got people down there that do stuff like that?
We do. And, I think most of it is aimed more kind of towards a boutique market. They're really selling more to the transitory population here, the tourists and the people that are traveling through. And they're not at a price point where most of the local families here are not rich, let's say. I mean, most are just scraping by. And, the difference between $5 a pound for beef and $8.99 a pound is not an insignificant impact on their budget for a weekly grocery budget. So, but I think some of that pricing is driven by, the requirement for USDA inspections and, part of the fact that the USDA system is so overrun that you have to make a slaughter date, 8-10 months in advance if you actually want to get a certified piece of meat that you can then retail to somebody else or sell to even wholesale to a restaurant that wants to retail it to a third party. Yeah. So, I think there's a lot of streamlining that can be done in that system to bring, local food prices in line with what we can get on the international market, let's say.
Yeah. See, there's a certain level of what I would call complication to investing with your neighbor and buying meat. Okay. You can't just go pick up a brisket and smoke it. I mean, there's guys that are getting into that.
Well, I mean, so there's also those arrangements like the cow share kind of arrangements where you're buying a quarter of a head of cattle on the hoof, and what you do with it after it's slaughtered is your business, and it's your cow, and do what you want. And that is, it's nice that option exists, but at the same point in time, like you said, it's not like you are going to the store and getting a cut of meat for dinner tonight. You're committing to buying a freezer for long-term storage. I mean, in the end, yes, you may save some money, but is it convenient? No, it's not. And that barrier to entry is really what holds a lot of people back.
It does. And I'll tell you what, it's complicated because there's cuts of meat in my freezer. Sometimes I don't even know what they are, but overall you get a little bit creative, and you make out really well. The other thing I like about it is, since I don't live right next to a grocery store that sells fresh meat, anytime I want to just get in my freezer, I just open it up and I figure out what we're going to have that night. And so the inconvenience is balanced off by this. It's right there in my freezer. Sometimes you get creative, but
that barrier to entry may be lower in rural communities, and in a lot of cases it probably is, because a lot of us are used to storing game. Say you harvest a deer and you can't eat it all right away, so you have to get used to that. So maybe those barriers to entry are different, looking at different populations, but I think the vast majority of people are going to have an issue with setting up a dedicated freezer, which is why I'm saying that streamlining those USDA regulations and allowing people to retail meat more easily, allowing farmers to retail meat more easily, would be a great thing,
Yeah. So you see that comment by Dr. Sweet. Dr. Sweet is actually one of the guys that helped me decide to commit to a party, right? He is a former Republican who made the commitment a couple years ago to commit to a new party. Things weren't working out as far as what he was doing. And so basically him and my friend Jason both kind of sat me down and said, we know that you're probably independent. We know, but take a look at what we're trying to do. And so thanks to Dr. Sweet, I managed to come on board. So his comment there, out west are culling beef herds as a direct result of this a response to COVID. Okay, some guys at a packing plant got sick. That should highlight to every single one of us, especially in rural upstate New York, that there's got to be a better way. If we go into our store next week and we're out of meat, it's because 80% of our beef goes through 4 major packing plants and requires a brand before it can be sold in a store. I mean, that's kind of ridiculous because we don't even know what country that meat comes from, right? They can't put country of origin labeling on the meat. That gets branded and then put on shelves in the store. What do you think about that? Does that play into support your neighbor?
I think there's a few things at play here, and one of them is that we have so centralized our food production and our food supply lines that something like this, one packing plant going out, has an effect across the entire industry. I actually think that probably beef producers are one of the lesser affected in this, just because they have such a longer maturation period. I mean, if you look at poultry producers, they're working on an 8-10 week schedule, and look, they're going to have to, even if look at it this way, if they didn't cull their current birds that are coming up, there would never be enough packaging, processing, production capacity to ever catch up. So there's an economic need to kind of take that bottleneck out of the pipeline. And I think that in a lot of ways, we owe it to ourselves to not only deregulate a lot of our food production, but also by doing that, it kind of spreads out the burden of that supply chain. And there aren't 4 major meat packers that control 90% of the livestock in the U.S. That's that may leverage scales of economy for that producer, and it may lower our overall food costs a little bit. But I think that we sacrifice some of our food security for that economic gain.
As a libertarian, I may wonder if some of the regulations crafted were in fact purchased to
well,
let's call it donation money to these big campaigns.
Well, I mean, you only have to look at who the directors of the FDA are. You only have to look at who runs the USDA to understand the corporate ties that the government has to large chemical companies on one side, and large producers on the other, and be that Dole or Monsanto or Bayer or any of those. If you look at the who's who of those government agencies, it's a mile long list of people that are former employees of those corporations.
They interconnect like this. These guys, they're
right, and I think that in a lot of ways, they've overstepped their bounds in their field. Because listen, as New York State, I don't think there's anything that the federal government can say to us if we say, look, we're going to let people in New York State sell meat to people in New York State. Without an inspection. It's when it crosses. It's only because all of our food crosses state lines that we have to get the federal government involved in the first place.
Yeah, so we can literally strike a blow against this. I want to call it disease. This twisted corporate intermixing with government. We can literally strike a blow if more people get involved in buying beef and chicken from their neighbors. Even those roadside egg stands, guys, if they're selling out every day, every time they put eggs out, they're gonna get more chickens, man. You're gonna have more eggs. And so right now, people, maybe $3 a dozen. I can buy a dozen eggs for $2 at Walmart. You're not really saving money. You're putting money right in your neighbor's pocket if you do it that way, right?
I would like to encourage that, and at the same point in time, I'd like to say, don't just do it now, because we are, seeing a supply line crisis. I mean, don't create a false economy for those people where they're going to go invest a bunch of money in more livestock, so that they can meet a demand that doesn't exist. If you create that demand and keep it up, always buy your eggs from those people, and not just because buy your milk at the grocery store now, you should be buying milk from your neighbor. You should always be, and I think that there's a big movement towards that more local eating now. And in some ways that's coming from, populations that you wouldn't think. It's coming a lot from the metropolitan populations are interested in eating food that is local to them. And I think as, a rural population, it only benefits us to, further promote that as a long-term solution.
It's so funny because this goes all the way back to when I was a kid on a farm. We used to butcher a cow every couple of years, and that cow or that bull that we had multi uses. And so for the first 15 years of my adult life, I didn't want to have anything to do with homegrown meat. But finally, one of the guys that worked for me had raised a cow, and he's like, "Here, just try some." You know what I mean? And I'll tell you what, grass-fed beef grown in central New York, whose purpose is to provide meat. Okay, they're not. We used to use it to get the heifers ready. Okay, this one cow. So that meat was not as delicious as it could be. So, but now it's literally a treat when I go to the butcher shop down in Otego, right, the Steiner's packing plant, and my buddy had taken this cow down there, and I pick up my boxes full of meat and I bring it home and put it in my freezer. There's a big, huge reward there. I'm feeling like I got closer to something important, that I put some money in my neighbor's pocket, that I now have food security. And look, guys, when we get our tax returns, our tax checks, we make agreements with these guys. They'll hold your money for you. They're not going to rip you off. You're going to get your 125 pounds or 150 pounds or whatever you decide to buy from the guy. And, it's going to end up in your freezer. It's food security, right? So that feels good. You're not going to be hungry for months.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's, I come from a hunter, a sportsman's perspective. So, I mean, when you've got a freezer full of venison, winter doesn't look quite as ominous,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so that, we could probably talk about this all night. But I'd like to kind of move back to you and I talking about local young people staying in New York State and what might encourage them to do that. Now, one of the things that helped, let's also mention you're heading off to law school pretty soon, aren't you?
Yeah. So
let's talk about that for a second. I think that's a great story.
So I mean, my background is kind of varied here, but I was born and raised in the Catskills here in Ulster County, third generation to live on this piece of land, and it's very difficult to make a living here. It's nearly impossible to make a living here, a good living. I mean, you can get by, but if you want the next level of quality of life, it's very difficult to obtain in upstate New York and a lot of places, I think. So, I've been forced to kind of leave the area, went to Florida, and I've come back to New York. And I went and got a bachelor's degree at the age of 31. I went back to school and got a bachelor's degree. And I came out of that and realized that, well, this bachelor's degree is basically useless to me. I mean, the jobs that pay what I need to make with a bachelor's degree don't exist around here. It's just not a market, especially more entry level jobs. That require a bachelor's degree. Most of the jobs you're going to get with that don't require a bachelor's degree. So why should I have made that investment in the first place? So. Once again, now I've decided to go to law school, and once again I find myself leaving New York to kind of pursue my own life, and I would love to come back here eventually and make my life long term here. This is my home. This is where my heart resides. This is where my father and my grandfather are buried, not 50 yards from where I sit right now.
Yeah, that's right.
So it saddens me to have to leave this place, because look, I have a relatively substantial acreage here, and just to foot the tax bill, it's just not doable. I mean, it would be, 10%, 20% of my salary every year. And that's before I eat and before I travel and before, I heat my house. And, so anyway, that's kind of my story of, I'm here and I'm on the town board now and I'm involved.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the reason why I'm involved is because I'm kind of in a privileged position where I can be, I can take this what amounts to a volunteer position. I mean.
So let me hit on that subject for a second, because it's one of my favorite things to talk about as a libertarian. We have counties and towns, and they're collecting millions of dollars in tax revenue, right? And they seem to, every single time there comes an opportunity to face a hardship or a crisis that presents a hardship, the first well that they go to is, okay, no more raises for you young people doing the work in this town. And like you just mentioned, serving on a town board, okay, it is basically a volunteer position. And I've never understood that. Okay, my entire life, that's always baffled me. That even a town board position, even them shuffling papers to approve overtime for a guy, the things that they do, why aren't they taking better care of themselves, and why aren't they taking better care of their neighbors with that money that comes through our budget? And as a guy on a town board, maybe you can answer some of those questions for me, because that has been a source of frustration for me my entire life. I don't understand why we don't pay these guys more. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think part of it is that, we inherently, look, not for national politicians, we're not talking about them, but I think, local people that are trying to help their community are going to inherently undervalue their services because they feel like they're providing a public service. Right. And it's not a bad thing to have a position that amounts to being voluntary, but it does, kind of drive away or limit the amount of involvement from young people because, listen, if I was making $30,000 a year here and just kind of getting by a family of three, I'm not going to really feel like donating my time for that, $2,000 a year that I'm going to get paid, quarterly. And so, I mean, it's, I'd say yes. Let's pay ourselves more, but we don't have the money to pay ourselves more because we don't control our budget to a large extent. We're kind of dictated what our expendable assets are. I mean, realistically, we get to keep a bunch of our property tax. That is what we can count on is our tax roll for real property. Everything else is, just this last year, no longer are we allowed to get our tax our sales tax on a quarterly basis directly from the county. Now it goes to the state, who then disperses it how they deem, the sales tax revenue should be dispersed. So, I mean, we just keep taking the money and putting it through extra steps that it doesn't need to go through. And I think that's one of the reasons why you see so much disenfranchisement with the system of taxation that we have, is because if I am taxed and that money goes to the town board, and the town board gets to decide how that money is best used within the community, then I think that's a very different thing than that money going to the governor and the governor saying, oh, well, we're going to give you back, $1 million for this project because, that's what Governor Cuomo wants. But it doesn't let us do the 10 other projects that we'd prefer to do with that $1 million as a community necessarily.
Yeah. Yeah. I want, and listen, I am still going to encourage some of these younger folks to do what I'm doing. I know I'm trying to bite off this big, huge thing and win this big, huge Senate race against this entrenched power structure.
I got this position, and we spoke about this a little bit last night in private, but I got this position because the person that held the position before me got pissed off at one of the other town board members and resigned. And there's no money keeping them there. There's it's not worth the money is not worth the frustration to hate something like this. So there was an empty position and nobody wanted it. So I stepped up and said, okay, well, I'll take the position. And then I went on the ballot and ran for the seat. But there was nobody running against me. I mean, it's an unwanted position, and there are I'm sure there are thousands of those positions across New York State. Thousands of them.
I'm sure there is.
That is the place where the Libertarian Party needs to get a foothold. It's where we can point to and say, hey, look, we're running things responsibly on a local level, and that's what this movement is all about: is localizing things and building a sense of community, and neighbors helping neighbors solve problems that they all hold in common.
I want these kids. I got a buddy out in Maryland. He's running for town supervisor. I got a young guy that ran a couple times for the county board. I met a kid this week. He lives up in Hartwick. I want these guys getting in there and taking a piece of this action and making it theirs. If we don't start bringing this government back to us and start fighting that power, these things that these guys tell us that we got to pay for, the problems that you are seeing, if we don't have young guys in there mixing it up, young ladies in there mixing it up and saying, we got to do better by our neighbor. We got to figure out what we can do to stop listening to these guys and keep this local.
Well,
I think more, because we're going to fix up our own properties. We're going to stay here. We got to see value in our communities. You know what I mean?
I think part of what will help get younger people involved is realizing the fact that government just keeps kicking the can down the road. And pawning this off on the next generation and the next generation and the next generation, and it's just a Ponzi scheme, basically. At the end, it's not sustainable. So I think that once people realize that, look, if we want to protect ourselves, our interests, and protect the interests of our children, we have to take a long, hard look at how society operates. And and I know that the Libertarian Party can seem quite radical to some people, and yes, there's some radical elements in the party, but what we all agree on is that you have to remove what the tumors in the system are by one way or another. And I think we disagree sometimes on the exact means by which to do that. But I think we all want more personal freedom. Yeah. We all want to keep things closer to home because, that's where people make the best decisions. Whether you like it or not, people make the best decisions when they're making them for their own self-interest.
And their neighbor, like, people love their neighbors most of the time. Sometimes,
right,
for the most part, you understand when your neighbor's mad when your dog barks. You know what I mean? And
and Larry Sharp, you brought up Larry Sharp earlier, and he said something a little bit about this, and which I think is pertinent, is that as you increase the population density, you bring in more populations with disparate backgrounds, with different cultures, with different ways of doing things. And in cases like that, sometimes you do need a little bit more government. Sometimes the government is the lubrication that allows those populations to get together in a way that's peaceful. In a
localized agreement, right? I mean, we're
right. That's a localized look. We have this issue, so we're going to address it.
But they make this local agreement amongst themselves, and I think that's key to a community's success. We do have to have those arguments on a local level. Do we want to grow solar panels or do we want to grow marijuana? Right. So I would rather grow marijuana, because if marijuana becomes unpopular, we can go right back to growing soybeans and stuff like that. Okay. I don't want to grow solar panels because the life expectancy of a solar panel is 20 years. I don't want to try to power a small town with 500 acres of solar panel when that will only power half, like 4,000 people worth of light bulbs, right? It's not.
I agree with you to a certain extent there, but I also want to say that, you know, part of our issue is that we are not using farmland that we have. You know, part of our economic issue is that we have available acreage that could be tilled, but isn't for various reasons. Mostly because it's not economically feasible. Mostly because you know, the agricultural opportunities that used to exist, you know, where I am personally, don't exist anymore, because, you know, dairy industry has completely changed in structure. It's changed so drastically in the last you know, 70 years that you know, our main economy here was dairy for you know, almost 2 centuries. You know, that is what we did well. We grew grass that fed cows. We don't grow much else, but we can grow grass. You know,
Right.
so and you can feed it. You can feed it to cows and make good butter. You know, so but that was our economy for 150 years, and now it's not. So, you know, and whether or not we go back to the way it used to be or not is a question of you know, what direction, you know, society as a whole is headed, I think.
Our area here, and we're a little bit north of you, we're on a main railroad line. And so there actually was numerous industrial manufacturing type outlets that have slowly been pushed out of New York State to the point where now I could list on my hand the manufacturing interests in Otsego County. I might take both hands, but I don't think so. I think I could do it on one hand. And so there's structures here that have gone empty for years that are depreciating. The power's hooked up to them. I would love to see some of that come back. And when I see these bribes being handed out all over the country for like the Buffalo projects and the Syracuse projects, and I want to scream at somebody and say, top-down economics and bribing big business doesn't do anything for people in the long run. It's a short-term solution, and it always fails. I've always seen it just become a burden on the local property taxpayers for decades. Andrew Cuomo's not the first guy to try that. Okay, his dad did it too. Okay, it was his dad's big program all over the.
I think to illustrate that, kind of your point there, you only have to look at what auto manufacturers are doing in the U.S., and that is moving away from you know, the liberal population centers up north in you know, Michigan and Detroit, and moving their plants to Tennessee, to Arkansas. You know, I mean, to places where labor is cheaper, the tax rate is cheaper, and you know, I think New York can do a lot to restructure in a way that makes it a lot friendlier for private individuals to be entrepreneurial, and for large corporations to be more attracted to doing business here.
I think it would be very simple, right? I wonder when a business that's been in a community for decades, right, sees $10 million go to a business that's just going to come in here and argue for a devaluation of their property. I always wonder how they feel. And as a matter of fact, I know some of them and I know how they feel, right? That it is a frustrating, upsetting thing. So then they want to shop for the government handout, and they get them too, but it just doesn't. It seems like an inefficient way to do business. If we just kind of leveled that playing field and we did things to get out of our way of our local businesses so they can help send products out to the rest of the world. I just think that would be a better way. We have plenty of clean manufacturing type ideas and situations that if they could afford to come here, there's people here to do the work for them.
Right. And I think there's also a culture in New York State that is not entrepreneur friendly. You know, it really isn't. You know, the self-employed individual is kind of looked down upon in society in New York State. You know, and I think that leads to a lot of people not being willing to take entrepreneurial risk. And really, you have to be willing to take risk. And politically, we're such this risk adverse population, and we want somebody to always fix what's wrong for us, instead of fixing what's wrong with us, fixing what's wrong with our neighbor, and growing in a kind of spreading things in a kind of more grassroots way.
Yeah.
I'm trying to read your comments here,
Yeah,
Tim.
that's my friend Michael. There's a plant down in Sydney. It's called Bendix. They make brake parts and stuff like that. And somebody correct me as to exactly what they make. But Sydney used to be a huge kind of thriving community, and now I gotta say that property values have taken a hit. The plants are slowly moving out. They're moving parts of their production other places because it's simply too expensive. So what's the remnants of Bendix down in Sydney now? And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they thrive a little bit on some government money that comes in to help them keep people employed. I don't want to insult anybody down there, but I believe that that's a big part of the system. But let's go back to Sean. I like philosophical comments like this radical ends by pragmatic means type stuff. And I like what you're saying there. I like pragmatic means, and I like the concept of radical ends. But why are these ends radical, right? Let's talk about, we want our communities to thrive. We want business here. We want our children at least to have the opportunity to stay. Like, some kids are going to want to go to a city because they're going to want to check it out. That's life. They're going to want to move south because the weather's better. But it's not really a radical end. We just want something back. We just want some sort of future for our kids, right? So I don't feel like I'm a radical for wanting that.
Well, I mean, I think that a lot of this is kind of in how you're viewing the subject, and those ends are the ends that need to be publicized by the Libertarian Party, and I think there's a little chatter that's probably a little darker than that as a party we have to kind of rise up above and realize that we're not in this by ourselves. We are in this with with the major parties of the time now. So let's look at ways that within our philosophical framework we can bring people together in ways that create novel agreement, and address issues that have been longstanding.
Yeah, no, I see. I think the issues have been longstanding, and the novel agreements. Look, every party that you look at has guys that are saying something that's philosophically off the charts. So, and sometimes those guys get a voice. So you can't say that like their philosophy on some level doesn't have value, because it does, right? It certainly is reflective of how the country was founded. It's certainly reflective of trusting your neighbor and being, your own best defender. So I get some of that. And I see the loons in the other parties, and I'm like, I don't know. These guys are okay. They're not. They're just talking. You know what I mean?
I think we have to be wary of tribalism in politics, and it's a very kind of a dangerous thing to face when we don't look at things deeply. We don't care to actually examine what an issue is. We're quick to kind of jump on with whoever it is we think can create a position that's tenable for us, and I think that's what you see a lot happening in the mainstream parties is, well, one talking head says something that everybody else thinks is something that they can defend when they're talking to the other party, so they run with it, but they don't necessarily think how what they're saying relates to the overall population, and we can be politically different people, and we can be religiously and ethnically diverse people, and get along, but it's something that we have to do as individuals. It's something that can't be forced on us, I mean.
Yeah. So look, I don't want to leave us at I think we covered everything for tonight. And I just want to let you know how much this conversation is important to libertarians, right? Here's you and I. We recognize the radical elements. Here's you and I. We're coming to an agreement that we should buy beef from our neighbors or chickens and stuff like that. And those are real solutions that we can work with, that we can help make happen starting tomorrow. So guys, I got a little joke I've been working on. Let me just lay it on you, right? Everybody says they vote for the lesser of two evils. Guess what, man? You're still voting for evil, so knock it off, right? Let's move forward in a more positive direction. And anything you want to end with, bud?
I would say, vote your conscience. Vote with your heart, and with your heart in a way is informed by your mind and informed by your own due diligence.
Yeah. Well, listen, once again, Vince, thank you. And I just hope that some of the guys that I want to check this out can see that you can enjoy participating in your local government. You can have a positive libertarian perspective and use that framework to work inside of your local government. And look, that, I want to win this Senate race. And if I win this Senate race, I will support whoever wants to run for whatever. You want to run for a county board, I'm going to be there for you guys to help pick you up and get you where you want to be. And then I only want to do this for 3 or 4 terms, guys. Take my job, right? When you're done with law school, come back, sue New York State, take my job as a senator. What do you say, man?
We'll see where the future leads.
All right.
But it's been great talking to you, Tim.
Yeah.
And, hopefully we can do this again soon.
Okay, we will. Thanks. And thanks everybody for checking it out, man. It was great. We had a lot of great comments. Have a good night, guys.
Bye now.